"Ma'am, this area is restricted." The voice came, sharp, controlled, unyielding. Captain Hayes stood before her, every line of his posture precise, his uniform immaculate, medals catching the morning sun in flashes of polished brass. Margaret's chest tightened, but she forced a calm smile. "I'm just here for my son," she said softly, her voice steady though her heart skipped a beat. His eyes flicked, almost involuntarily, to the crease of her sleeve. The faint edge of a tattoo peeked from beneath the fabric. Margaret didn't notice him freeze at first. She was focused on Daniel, her son, standing a few yards away with the other graduates. His uniform was spotless, his posture disciplined, chest out, chin high, as if he'd been born for this moment. Captain Hayes's lips pressed into a thin line. His hand hovered mid-air, a subtle pause that spoke volumes more than words ever could. The bustling parade ground seemed to quiet around them, the distant clatter of boots on concrete and the crisp notes of the Marine band fading into a tense silence. For the briefest moment, Margaret felt an uncanny weight press down on her chest, as if the world had shifted, and she alone noticed. She tucked her sleeve subtly, thinking nothing of the ink beneath it. Her tattoo had been with her for decades, a relic of a past she had long kept buried. It was a mark of courage, of missions unseen, of sacrifices no one would ever know. Just a small, discreet design along her forearm, hidden under layers of ordinary life. No one ever looked. No one ever needed to, but Captain Hayes's stare lingered, unblinking, a flicker of recognition in his eyes that made her pulse jump. He stepped slightly to the side, subtly blocking her path, a motion so precise it could have been rehearsed. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your visitor's pass," he said, his voice tightening just enough to suggest the slightest suspicion. Margaret's smile did not falter. She had learned long ago how to carry herself with poise under scrutiny. "Of course, Captain," she replied evenly. Her hand rested lightly on the strap of her bag. "I'll head back to the family viewing area." He didn't immediately move. His gaze was still fixed on her, scanning, measuring, processing. Margaret felt the weight of his attention, like a spotlight illuminating some hidden corner of her life. Every instinct told her to turn and leave, yet a strange calm settled over her, the kind only experience can teach. She had faced worse, much worse, in the shadows of her own past. Behind her, the parade continued. Daniel's squad marched in perfect formation, their boots striking the ground in flawless rhythm. Families clapped, cameras clicked, the Marine band struck up a stirring anthem, but Margaret barely noticed. Her mind was locked on Captain Hayes and the unspoken tension hanging in the air between them, and then it hit her. A memory, sharp and sudden, a night decades ago, far from this sunny parade ground, when courage and secrecy were the currency of survival. The tattoo on her forearm had been earned in those moments, a permanent reminder of the choices she had made. The choices no one could ever know about. Captain Hayes's expression softened just slightly, but his body remained rigid, professional, unreadable. Margaret realized something then. He recognized the mark, recognized how the air around them seemed to hum with quiet tension. Margaret's heart raced, not from fear, but from the weight of the silent acknowledgement. A secret she thought had faded into history had been seen, and in that fleeting, frozen moment, she understood. This day, meant to celebrate her son, had just become something far more complicated. She gave a polite nod, an unspoken truce, and stepped aside, but she could feel the captain's gaze follow her, locked on that tiny hint of her past. She straightened, inhaled deeply, and turned toward Daniel, ready to celebrate, unaware that the shadows of her history were already waking. The ceremony continued, the rhythmic stomp of boots and crisp commands of drill instructors echoing across the parade ground. Margaret's eyes followed Daniel, her chest swelling with pride, yet a strange unease settled over her. Every glance at Captain Hayes reminded her of the frozen moment earlier, the way his eyes had lingered on the edge of her sleeve. She tried to focus on the familiar warmth of the moment, her son's first graduation, a milestone she had waited for all these years. But the memory of Hayes's gaze refused to fade. It was not curiosity, nor casual interest. It was recognition, a sharp, quiet understanding that rattled her in a way she hadn't felt in decades. Margaret tugged lightly at her cuff, as if to bury the tattoo further beneath the fabric. But the memory came unbidden, the night she had earned that mark. The operations she had taken part in, missions shrouded in secrecy, sacrifices made in shadows. Each detail replayed in her mind, the adrenaline, the cold steel of the night, the lives she had touched, and the ones she had lost. That ink was not just a symbol, it was proof of who she had been before motherhood, before ordinary life. Hayes's presence remained like a shadow at the edge of her awareness. He had stepped back when families moved forward, yet she could feel his eyes tracing her from the corner of the parade ground. There was no judgment, only that unmistakable shock of recognition. He had seen someone who had once walked paths few could even imagine. The band struck up another march, and Daniel's squad executed a flawless pivot. Margaret clutched the program tighter, her knuckles white. She could hear the soft rustle of uniforms, the shuffle of boots, and beneath it all, the quiet, almost imperceptible heartbeat of tension between her and Hayes. A whisper of wind lifted her hair. brushing against the tattoo. The sensation sent a shiver down her spine, not from cold, but from the memory it unlocked. Every shadow, every mission, every secret flashed through her mind, and she realized something unsettling. She had never been more visible than she was at this very moment. Captain Hayes moved again, subtly, positioning himself near the edge of the viewing area, close enough to observe, yet careful to remain professional. He wasn't confronting her yet, but the weight of his recognition hung in the air like a storm about to break. Margaret felt it, a silent pulse that quickened her own heartbeat. She thought of Daniel again, unaware of the tension unfolding around his mother. Her pride battled with instinctive caution. Every fiber of her training, every lesson learned in darker days, told her to remain calm, to keep the secret buried. And yet, Hayes knew. He had recognized the mark. He had seen the woman who had survived, who had served in ways that few could even imagine. The rest of the crowd seemed oblivious, caught up in cheers and applause, cameras flashing, parents calling out names. But Margaret felt isolated in a bubble of awareness. It was only her and Hayes now, a silent understanding stretching between them. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to appear composed, even joyful. Her fingers brushed against the edge of her sleeve, as if to reassure herself that she was still just a mother here, watching her son achieve a lifelong dream. Yet deep down, she knew the calm was fragile. Hayes's recognition was a spark in dry grass, a spark that could ignite a revelation she wasn't ready to face. And somewhere in that quiet, tense moment, Margaret realized that this day, the day she thought was just about pride and celebration, was about to become far more complicated. The secret she carried, hidden in plain sight for decades, had already been discovered. She turned her gaze back to Daniel, forcing a smile that felt heavy on her face. The Marines marched on, the band played on, and the crowd cheered, but Margaret knew the real battle, the one between past and present, had just begun. The ceremony ended with applause echoing across the parade ground. Families surged forward, cameras flashing, voices blending into a warm, chaotic hum. Margaret clutched her son's graduation program, a faint smile on her lips. Proud yet distracted. Captain Hayes didn't leave. Instead, he maintained his distance at the edge of the viewing area, his posture rigid, every movement deliberate. Margaret sensed it before she consciously realized he was waiting. Not just observing, but waiting. There was purpose behind that frozen gaze, a silent insistence that would not let her slip away unnoticed. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, the edge brushing against her forehead, and exhaled slowly. Her fingers grazed the faint curve of her tattoo beneath her sleeve. A shiver ran down her spine. For decades, it had been a secret, hidden in plain sight. And now, it had been noticed. Hayes finally approached, walking with a measured pace, each step echoing quietly on the concrete. Margaret stayed still, forcing calm, but the air between them grew taut with unspoken tension. His eyes didn't flicker. They studied her, sharp and calculating, reading every micro-expression, every slight adjustment of posture. "Ma'am," he said, his voice lower now, almost intimate in its gravity. "I need a moment." His tone was professional, yet it carried weight, a hint of curiosity and recognition that made Margaret's pulse quicken. She nodded politely, though her mind raced. She had faced dangerous men, hostile environments, situations where a single misstep could cost lives. Yet this quiet scrutiny at a sunny graduation was different, subtle, personal, dangerous in its own way. Hayes's gaze returned to the sleeve of her blouse. The ink that had never drawn attention now commanded it. He paused, a fraction of a second that stretched into eternity. Margaret felt the intensity like heat on her skin. She didn't flinch. She didn't move her sleeve. There was no need. The mark, etched long ago in fire and sacrifice, spoke for itself. "Do you understand what that means?" he asked, voice low, controlled. His eyes locked on hers, searching for acknowledgement, for a trace of the truth she had carried silently for decades. Margaret's smile remained calm, measured. "I understand," she replied softly, her words steady. "It's a part of me, yes, but I'm still just a mother here." Her tone was even, but the subtle tremor in her fingertips betrayed the storm beneath her composed surface. For a heartbeat, they simply stood there, two trained observers, one hiding a past of extraordinary courage, the other recognizing it with the precision of a Marine. The world around them continued. Laughter, applause, cameras snapping, families hugging. But for Margaret and Hayes, the parade ground had shrunk to a bubble of shared understanding. A silent confrontation heavy with history. "You survived," he said finally. The statement more than a question, a quiet acknowledgement of battles, choices, and dangers few could imagine. His eyes softened slightly, but the professional edge remained. Margaret exhaled, letting the tension ease just a fraction. "I did," she said, "and I stayed hidden when I had to. I'm here today for my son, nothing more." Hayes studied her again, then gave a subtle nod. There was respect there, deep and unspoken, but also a challenge. He knew who she had been, and he knew she could not hide it forever. Daniel's voice broke the tension, calling for his mother. Margaret turned toward him, relief washing over her. She smiled genuinely, walking briskly to meet him. Yet in the back of her mind, She knew this was only the beginning. The captain remained silent, his gaze never leaving her as she approached her son. A quiet promise lingered in the air. The past had been seen, and nothing would ever be the same. Margaret hugged Daniel tightly, whispering words of pride, masking the storm inside her. The world celebrated his achievement, oblivious to the silent battle of recognition, courage, and legacy unfolding just beyond the applause. And somewhere, beneath the hum of the crowd in the bright sunlight, a secret prepared to resurface, ready to challenge not only her courage, but the truth she had kept hidden from everyone, even her son. The crowd began to disperse, families gathering their belongings, cameras clicking as proud parents posed with graduates. Margaret held Daniel's hand, her mind still buzzing from the silent encounter with Captain Hayes. The parade ground felt ordinary again, yet an invisible tension clung to the air like smoke. Hayes approached once more, deliberate, calm, but every step carried gravity. Margaret felt a familiar surge of alertness, a residue of instinct from a life long hidden from ordinary eyes. She stopped, allowing him the space to stand beside her, the murmur of the crowd fading into the background. "You have no idea how many times I've seen that tattoo," he said quietly, his voice low, resonant with respect. His eyes scanned the ink, the symbol she thought forgotten. "I've seen it on the battlefield, in reports, on the names of those who didn't make it back." Margaret's chest tightened. The words weren't just recognition, they were acknowledgement of the life she had left behind, a life of missions, danger, courage, and loss. She had buried it under motherhood, under quiet days and ordinary smiles, thinking it would never matter again. "I didn't expect anyone to notice," she admitted, voice calm but tinged with the faint tremor of emotion. "I'm just a mother now. That's all anyone should see." Hayes's gaze didn't waver. "I've been in command long enough to know courage when I see it. That tattoo, it's not just ink, it's a record of the extraordinary. And yet, here you are, standing quietly, watching your son graduate." Margaret swallowed, memories flooding back in vivid flashes, covert missions in deserts and jungles, nights where failure meant death, faces of comrades she had lost, moments when bravery was the only choice. The ink on her arm was a silent witness to everything she had endured. And now, a Marine, a stranger, recognized it. "I survived because I had to," she said softly, voice steady. "And now, I live for him." She gestured subtly to Daniel, who stood oblivious a few steps away, smiling proudly in his new uniform. "This day, it's about him, not me." Hayes nodded, but the respect in his eyes deepened. "You've carried more than most could imagine, and yet you never sought glory. You stayed in the shadows. That takes more strength than most can measure." A quiet pause hung between them. Margaret felt the weight of acknowledgement, an unspoken validation that the sacrifices, the battles, the hidden courage, all of it, had not gone unnoticed. She exhaled slowly, a subtle release of decades-long tension. Daniel ran up to her then, holding out his certificate. "Mom, look, I did it." His smile was wide, innocent, completely unaware of the storm of recognition and history that had just passed between her and Captain Hayes. Margaret knelt slightly, hugging him tight. "You did it, Daniel. I'm so proud of you," she whispered, voice rich with emotion. She felt the warmth of ordinary pride, a stark contrast to the extraordinary courage etched in the ink on her arm. Hayes stepped back slightly, giving them space. He offered a subtle salute, a gesture of respect, professional yet deeply personal. Margaret returned a nod, a quiet acknowledgement of the understanding they now shared. Her past had been recognized, her courage validated, but her present remained devoted to her son. As the crowd moved on, cameras flashing and laughter filling the air, Margaret felt an unusual calm. The secret that had defined her life for decades was known, yet contained, respected, and understood. She looked at Daniel, his bright eyes full of hope and pride, and realized that heroism could be quiet. It could be hidden in plain sight. And sometimes the most extraordinary acts were the ones the world never saw. The captain's gaze lingered a moment longer before he finally turned, leaving her and Daniel to their celebration. Margaret felt the weight of the day settle, not just pride for her son, but a deep, quiet satisfaction. Her past, her courage, her sacrifices, all of it mattered. And yet, today, the greatest triumph was watching her son step confidently into his future. The sun had climbed higher, casting golden light across the parade ground. Families were packing up chairs, folding programs, and laughing over photos. The energy was celebratory, carefree, but Margaret walked beside Daniel with a quiet, reflective calm. Every cheer, every clap felt distant compared to the storm of acknowledgement that had passed between her and Captain Hayes. Daniel turned to her, eyes shining. "Mom, did you see me? Did I do okay?" "You did more than okay," she said, hugging him tightly. Her words carried pride, but also the subtle weight of experience. She let him go just enough to meet his gaze. "You were perfect out there. I couldn't be prouder." He grinned, oblivious to the invisible history surrounding them, the silent validation of courage etched in her tattoo and recognized by a Marine who knew what true heroism looked like. Hayes approached one last time, his presence commanding yet discreet. He stopped a few feet away, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You've done something remarkable," he said. "Not just surviving, but raising someone like him. That takes more strength than you might ever realize." Margaret nodded, a small, genuine smile tugging at her lips. "I've always believed the real heroes are the ones who don't seek recognition. Today is about him, not me." Hayes's eyes softened. The rigid professionalism had melted into quiet respect. He gave a subtle nod and a salute, not for ceremony, but for understanding. Margaret returned it with a gentle tilt of her head, a silent acknowledgement that this moment of recognition was shared and yet contained, a secret kept safe amid the ordinary celebration. Daniel tugged at her hand again, pulling her toward the family photos. Margaret felt the contrast sharply, a mother in jeans, smiling at her son, blending perfectly with ordinary life, a lifetime of extraordinary courage hidden beneath the surface, now acknowledged but invisible to the world. She watched him, feeling a surge of pride that had nothing to do with medals, missions, or recognition. This was real. This was tangible. The culmination of ordinary and extraordinary, her son stepping into his future, her past quietly validated, the weight of secrecy eased by one person who understood. The breeze stirred the edge of her sleeve, brushing against the tattoo. She traced it lightly with her finger, a private smile touching her lips. That mark, once a symbol of peril and survival, now carried a quiet resonance, proof that courage could exist unseen, that bravery did not always demand applause. Hayes lingered a moment longer, eyes scanning the crowd, ensuring all was well. Then, without another word, he turned, walking back toward the Marines, leaving Margaret and Daniel to their celebration. The brief connection, the acknowledgement of history, lingered in the air like the echo of a distant drum. Margaret held Daniel's hand, looking around at the other families, the proud graduates, the sunlit grounds. She felt the weight of all her experiences, the battles she had faced, the lives she had touched, the sacrifices she had made, blend with the ordinary beauty of the moment. Heroism was not always in grand gestures. Sometimes, it lived quietly in resilience, in love, and in the courage to live a life that mattered beyond recognition. As Daniel skipped ahead to pose for photos with friends, Margaret stayed a step behind, watching him. The world saw only a proud mother at a graduation, but she knew the truth. Her strength had been seen, respected, and understood, and in that understanding she found a profound peace. The parade ground faded behind them as they walked toward the car. Margaret inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth of sunlight and pride. She glanced down at her tattoo once more, tracing its lines, remembering the paths it had marked. Today, nothing extraordinary needed to be said aloud. Today, the quiet acknowledgement, the love for her son, and the respect from someone who understood was enough. In the ordinary rhythm of life, extraordinary courage had found its place, hidden in plain sight, yet unshakable.